Welcome to Clinical Trialblazers, where we explore the human stories behind breakthrough clinical research. I am your host, Alberto Grignolo. Today, I am joined by Heather Turner, CEO of LB Pharmaceuticals, a late-stage company focused on developing therapies for neuropsychiatric disorders. A lawyer by education and training who started her career as an associate at the Silicon Valley law firm Cooley LLP, Heather brings more than 25 years of experience across biotech and the life sciences, with a career that spans legal, operational, and executive leadership roles across multiple organizations such as Orexigen and Lyell Immunopharma. Over the years, Heather has led multiple funding rounds for several companies, totaling approximately $1.4 billion. Her work culminated in the $3.1 billion acquisition of Carmot Therapeutics by Roche. She served as president and CEO of Carmot prior to joining LB. As CEO of LB Pharmaceuticals, Heather has continued to drive significant growth, raising approximately $400 million since September 2025. The company recently launched 2 clinical trials, respectively in bipolar depression and in schizophrenia. Heather Turner, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Glad to have you. I'll just say that a friend of mine who used to work for you in a previous company told me that you were the best CEO he ever worked for. And so that got my immediate attention, and I've been really looking forward to our conversation today. So here we go.
Well, that's nice.
Heather, take us back to the moment you first realized you wanted to move beyond legal and operational roles into executive leadership. Was that your original ambition as a young person, or something that evolved in your mind over time?
My initial goal when I set out was to be a general counsel and to work in biotech companies. And as I progressed through my career, I was frequently taking on operating leadership roles in various different functions. I really enjoyed the challenge of learning something new and kind of digging into an area that was new to me. It also made me, I think, a better lawyer because I just understood the business better and I could actually assess risk better. And it wasn't until the role right before Carmot where I decided, gosh, I've been taking on all these leadership roles, but I never really pushed to get the title associated with that. I was always general counsel. And so I finally decided to make the step and take on the role of chief operating officer, which reflected a lot of the work that I had already been doing. And that ultimately is what led to being then promoted to CEO. But it took a while for me to actually take that step and push for the title that really represented the work that I had been doing.
Looking across your career from Cooley, the law firm, to multiple biotech leadership roles, were there some key inflection points that ultimately positioned you for the CEO role?
There were a couple of things that ultimately led to this. One, I wanted to have a wide variety of functional experience as well as transactional experience and, frankly, working through some crises because that's a very significant part of what we do here in the biotech is manage things when they don't go exactly as we planned. So I wanted to gain that level of experience. And also there was just this emotional side of it where you have the confidence to step into the role. This is a difficult place, I think, to step into, and being mentally prepared for that or emotionally prepared for that, I think, is also important. So there were a couple points in time that I think made a difference for me. One was my husband. I had never even contemplated the idea of being CEO. And there was one point in time when we were having a conversation and he very casually said to me, well, when you become CEO, and that was the first time anybody had ever even discussed this idea with me. And it was one of those moments where I kind of took a step back and I was like, gosh, could I do that? And then another moment was at Carmot when they were contemplating making a change at the company. And I was thinking about whether or not I ought to try to put myself into the mix for the role of CEO. And I had a conversation with a board member who really helped me think this through. And she was the one that said, why not?
What lesson did you draw from those experiences? Your husband and your board member basically seeing you as a CEO potential, where perhaps you hadn't thought about it ever.
I think with women, we tend to think we need more and more and more experience before we take that next role. Whereas I think sometimes with men, they're more willing to step in and take the role when, maybe they know 60% of it or 50% of it. Whereas a woman is like, I need 80, I need 90% of it. Allowing yourself to take that leap when maybe you don't have 100% experience that you might need for that role is I think important. This is something that I will frequently say to other women, which is take the leap sooner than you think. It's actually something that we talk about. I'm a part of the Biotech CEO Sisterhood. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we talk about is, how do we bring up other women? How do we continue to build other women into these roles of leadership? And one of the things we talk about is how sometimes you just need to provide the prompt. And so when you have women in your organization and you've hired women into the C-suite, I will frequently ask them, what do you want to do? And if I see somebody who's got the capability and the potential to be a CEO, I will say, have you thought about it? Because I do think that's an important step in this process of getting women to even consider the role.
And your own story certainly confirms that approach. I believe the Biotech Sisterhood got together at JP Morgan this past January in San Francisco, and I saw a photo of a large number of Sisterhood members. Were you in that photo as well?
I was, yeah. There was a lot of us at JP Morgan wearing pink on Tuesday. So that was the second year that we have done that. And it's building momentum for sure.
Let me ask you another question around being the CEO. What fundamentally changes when you move from a senior executive role, which you had, to the CEO seat?
I think the biggest change is that accountability ultimately lies with you. For every single decision of the organization, I need to be accountable for that decision. And so that's a fundamental change, one in which I embrace, and it's a part of the job that I enjoy. But at the same time, it's also one that, comes with a little bit of scariness because ultimately the decisions are going to be yours to be made. I think a lot of CEOs can reflect on that. And because the ultimate decisions lie with you and because, you're looking across the organization and thinking about how everything works together, I think it can be a little bit lonely. In terms of making a transition from being a lawyer to a CEO, I often get asked that question, like, how is that transition? And it's interesting because as a lawyer, your job is to identify and manage risk and try to mitigate risk. And so you often lead with risk. And what I've realized is that as an executive or as a CEO, I really need to lead with benefit. When you think about this risk benefit calculus, I really need to lead with benefit, the reasons why we want to do something and what we expect to get out of doing something and what's that return on investment.
It's still about a benefit-risk ratio, right? I mean, the CEO cannot exactly forget about risks, but I take your point that focusing on benefit is job one. Mm-hmm. But the risks cannot be overlooked, can they?
That's right. And then you end up making those calculus and you end up as a group talking about it and you end up with the right, hopefully, outcome. But in terms of my role is to lead with the benefit and to lead with the vision, have that appropriate conversation about how to do that in a way that mitigates the risk.
The transition from being, say, in a number 2 position to a number 1 position, I think you suggest, is a big transition. I mean, one might be number 2, and as the proverb goes, only a heartbeat away from leadership, but it's a big jump, right, from being number 2 to being number 1.
I totally agree with that because I think you start to feel the weight of the decisions that you're making because the decisions that you're making impact patients and patient safety and frankly, patient benefit. It impacts employees. Are you doing right by your employees? Are you treating them well? Are you giving them opportunity? You have a stakeholder in your board and you're accountable to your board and how, you're making decisions. And then you have these other stakeholders of investors and the number of different people that you become accountable to, I think grows. And that then you carry quite a bit of weight with that, or at least I carry quite a bit of weight with that. And that's the biggest difference. You're no longer just responsible for a function or a few functions, right? You take on many other responsibilities.
You are carrying the whole organization on your shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
Is that weight overwhelming at times?
Absolutely. It definitely is. It's one of these situations where you have to dig deep into who you are as a person and make sure that you're being faithful to your integrity and to your values and to who and what you want to be. And for me, those are the things that ultimately guide when I feel those feelings of being overwhelmed. It's what guides me to make sure that we're doing the right things, is just going back to the very basics of who I am.
Your background in law, governance, capital markets, you work at Cooley, which I understand is a firm really engaged in M&A, in acquisition work and related activities. How did those experiences shape the way you approach stepping into full leadership of organizations as you have?
I think one of the biggest surprises that I have realized as I have made this transition is how well being a lawyer prepared me for being a CEO. So one of the things that you learn as a lawyer in a law firm is how to manage big projects. And these projects have lots of different components. There's a lot of steps that have to be completed in that transaction. There's a lot of people that have to come together and align on how you're saying and doing things. And as a CEO, fundraising is a very large, complicated project. And so it has really informed how I approach a lot of these big projects. And a lot of it comes with preparation and working backward. Like if you take a board meeting, for example, that's a large, complicated project. So I often will map out the plan, create, working backward from the board meeting date, thinking about the content, thinking about the participants, thinking about what other stakeholders I might want to include, how do I want to approach my board, who do I need to talk to in advance, are there other experts that I need to bring in? So I think it really trains you very, very well for approaching large, complicated projects and gaining alignment with everybody that's involved in that.
After all, due diligence is a legal term, is it not? Or legal expression.
It is. And that's a big part of any of these big projects, right? When a company is engaged in an acquisition, the best thing you can do is have done a lot of work in advance. The first thing we did at Carmot when I joined that company was, figure out what our warts were and how are we going to approach them? How are we going to fix them? What's the plan if we don't have time to fix them? And it's surprising how well that helps with everything else, right? Because when you do get into that acquisition process, nothing is a surprise. They don't ask a question that you haven't already prepared for. And it really helps because it allows you to come across as very credible. Your team, it looks prepared. It just is a very important way, I think, to present the company and the team.
You have raised significant amounts of capital over the years, including most recently $400 million for LB Pharma. And you've spoken about how you prepared your conversations with investors. Can you talk a little about the toughest moments in the fundraising process? Were they related to market timing or scientific risk or investor skepticism? How did you navigate those tough moments?
We started fundraising in early 25, and it was one of the worst markets I've ever seen in terms of biotech fundraising. It had pretty much dried up on the public company side of things. IPOs were not happening. On the private side of things, investors were staying on the sidelines, and it was really big challenge to try to get investors to engage. I think two things made a big impact in our ability to be successful ultimately in the IPO. And one of them is resilience and grit. We just kept trying. We just kept thinking about different ways that we could approach it. The other ultimately was conviction. We as an executive team had conviction in what we thought was the right thing to do for the programs. And at the end of the day, that's what ultimately led to the IPO, was the fact that we really thought it was important that we do one one trial in schizophrenia and one trial in bipolar depression, and we wanted to raise the capital for both of those trials. And we were open to suggestions. We were open to creative solutions. And ultimately, one of our board member investors suggested that we do an IPO where you truly use the testing the water process as a price finding exercise. And you go in with very much an open mind as to how that might play out. And ultimately, that's what led to us getting the deal done, was because we allowed the investors to really dictate the price of that IPO. And that allowed us to raise the $300 million. So it was the conviction on what we thought was right for the assets, and also, frankly, being open to the fact that we might need to do things a little bit differently.
Was it hard to do that, to lower your price expectations?
I'm sure it was for investors. For me, it was so critically important to raise the capital that it was important for me to continue the development of this asset. I think that this asset has a lot of potential to do and help a significant number of patients. So for me, that was my driving principle. That was most important, was to raise the capital. And frankly, the other aspect of that was just making sure that our employees were treated fairly and appropriately in that context, because I knew I needed them to be motivated and engaged in order for us to be successful. So that was the other piece of it.
Asset development. Let's talk a little about that. Looking back at the stages of drug development, were there some really hard calls you had to make? For example, did you see the need to cancel a project that previously had shown promise? Did you have a situation like that in your career?
Given that I've worked in biotech for my entire career, I would say that one of the defining aspects of working in a biotech company is that you are frequently asked to make decisions with incomplete information. So whether you're having to decide on the dose that you're going to study in a trial, or on a development candidate that you're ultimately going to take into the clinic, or a trial design, or an interpretation of a result, you never have complete information, and you're always having to make some choices around, is doing another trial, or is adding an arm, or are doing those studies, an appropriate return on investment. Do we even have the money? Often you don't even have the money to do the additional trials that you would like to do, but you can't do, or maybe you don't have the time. So you're constantly being asked to make decisions in the face of incomplete information. And that is, I think, a very unique attribute of biotech. And it's not for everybody. A lot of people are really uncomfortable having to make decisions with significant amount of incomplete information, because there's always risk involved that you're going to get that wrong. And so I think the best thing you can do when you're confronted with these situations is just try to get as much information as you can, try to engage as many experts as you can. And then the other, I think, aspect to that that's important is to acknowledge quickly when you made a mistake, because that's the corollary to this, right? And so as an executive team, as a CEO, I think you have to be open to the fact that you may make a mistake in your decision, or you may make the wrong decision. And the sooner you can acknowledge that, the sooner that you can accept that, okay, maybe this wasn't the right decision, let's see what we can do next, is, I think, also an important piece of this. And that's a very big cultural aspect of a company. You want to, or at least I want to, create a culture in a company where people are comfortable to say, I think I got that wrong, need to shift, need to do something different. If you have a culture of fear where people aren't willing to come forward and say, we might have made a mistake here, then I think that is, a disservice to the whole company and to the programs that you're trying to develop.
And it sounds like it starts at the top. In other words, you've been role modeling the willingness to admit having made a mistake, so that your people in your organization will say, okay, she admits it, so I can admit it too, and we're okay.
That's right. That's an important piece of this.
Starts with you. Right. I'm wondering, as a lawyer without, as far as I know, training in clinical pharmacology or psychiatry or neurology, and being surrounded by specialists in science and medicine, how do you make a decision about an asset?
I think first I admit that I'm not a scientist, and I I will ask people to explain things to me often as though I'm a sixth grader. And I think that helps. Just acknowledging that I don't have that expertise, I think, is an important step in expressing that vulnerability and ability to acknowledge that you may not have all the answers. Importantly, I surround myself with experts, and I encourage everybody that works for me to do the same. And I think reaching out to those people who have either done it before or have experience in the field is, I think, a very important step to making sure that you're building that as much knowledge and information as you can. So I think there's this emotional intelligence to it in addition to data intelligence, and both are important. To me, this is one of the most important aspects of biotech is you surround yourself with people who don't have a need to be the smartest person in the room. Because the moment you have somebody in the room who thinks they're the smartest, it shuts down discussion. It shuts down, that fact finding. And so that's an important aspect of how I build my team, is making sure that everybody acknowledges that we don't have all the answers.
I want to ask you, what makes a successful biotech CEO? And the reason for the question is that I've heard it said that CEOs whose biotech assets fail are still highly employable because they know failure. They've lived through it. What do you think about it? What makes a successful CEO? One that gets all the assets approved by the regulators, or potentially one that continues to fail and yet is still employable?
I think I have a broader definition of success. I believe part of my success is the development of people that work with me and giving them opportunity to be in an organization where they can thrive and have fun and learn and enjoy is important. Having perspective is important. So I think failure provides perspective. You start to understand that this isn't the end all be all. I've seen this before at a different company. This is manageable. Because then as a CEO, you're not freaking out. The house isn't on fire anytime anything goes wrong. You have perspective. You understand that these things happen, and you can then deal with them in a very measured way and just focus on the problem solving rather than the freak out.
Was there one decision that felt uncomfortable or really risky at the time, but in the end it proved critical and successful? A decision you made or had to make?
When I joined Carmot Therapeutics, we were, developing a portfolio of assets in the cardiometabolic space. And at the time, that space really just was starting to heat up in a really kind of meaningful way. And we were thinking about going public, and then another company went public, Structure Therapeutics went public, and they had a successful IPO. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, we might need to do this very quickly because there's a lot of momentum here. And we want to take advantage of that momentum that's building in this space. So even though it was a challenging IPO market, because we were a cardiometabolic company, because we had clinical stage cardiometabolic assets, we thought, okay, this is something that we should take advantage of. And as soon as we started that process, the interest in the company from a strategic side picked up pace as well. And we found ourselves in a dual process where we were executing against the IPO. That was our base case. And we were then executing against a strategic transaction as well. And it was a competitive strategic transaction process as well. So we were doing both completely in parallel. And we were using the process of the IPO to help establish the timeline for the strategic process, because there was a desire, for some anyway, to complete the transaction before the company went public, because we would become more expensive at that time. And at the end of the day, we ended up doing the acquisition with Roche, and we never actually became a public company. And I would tell you that at that time, I really questioned whether that was the right decision. Because I really felt like there was this potential to have an opportunity to create significantly more value for patients and stockholders looking back on that now, having a couple years of separation, I really think that ended up being an excellent decision because cardiometabolic drug development is very expensive and it's almost impossible to launch as a biotech company in that space. It's just such a large primary care market.
Now, 2 years in, has the Carmot asset progressed in the clinic and towards patients? What's the status now? I'm curious as to
they're starting. They're going to start phase 3 for the latest stage asset, and they started a phase 2 for the oral. So they're continuing to progress those programs, which is great.
Turning now to the future generations of CEOs, is there any advice you would give to women leaders who aspire to be CEOs in biotech, perhaps including go to law school?
I think you got to continue to do those things that are scary. I think when you take on those roles that are scary, it's when the most growth occurs. And it feels scary often because you feel like you don't have all of the experience that you need in order to take on that role. And I would just encourage women to take the leap sooner than they think. That I think they'll be surprised by how successful they might be in taking on something that's scary and sooner than you might think you're ready for.
If you don't mind my asking you, can you talk about your own experience with gender dynamics throughout your career as a woman who has really excelled in a male-dominated industry?
I think the most challenging thing for me is to have been underestimated. I feel like I was underestimated for a lot of my career. And for a while, you take it a bit personally. Like, what am I not doing? Why am I not enough? What more do I need? And now I think with experience, it's more of a motivator now. It's more like, okay, great. If you want to underestimate me, that's okay. I think I'm going to prove to you that you're going to be wrong. So that has shifted with experience and time. But in the beginning, it's hard not to take that personally and start to figure out, what it is that you need to bring more of. That's hard.
So a T-shirt once that applies to this, and it said, worn by a woman, and it said, go ahead, underestimate me. This will be fun.
That is kind of where I am right now.
You mentioned the Biotech Sisterhood. Can you tell me more about that, the role that it plays or wishes to play, and how effective it is, and to what ends, in your perspective?
It has been just a wonderful organization that has significantly grown in the last 5 years, where it's a place where you have hundreds of women that are available to answer any questions like, hey, has anybody dealt with this? Or has anybody heard of this investor? Or has anybody heard of this vendor? And people are very willing to share their experiences, their information. I've learned a lot from women who have they're in companies that are in a later stage than me. So for example, I'm a development stage company, but I've learned a lot from women who were CEOs of commercial stage companies. So you can really start to learn about the next stage and how to manage that. Emotional support. There's a lot of benefit in seeing that you're not the only one that's experiencing, whether it's being underestimated or, feeling like you're not being given the right opportunities. It's nice to have that network of people around you to know that you're not alone. And frankly, they're an incredibly successful group of people. And I think that often just gets missed that, these women have sold companies, they've launched assets, they've, brought amazing drugs to patients. And that's also nice because it's just this opportunity to celebrate.
Now, on that note, we need to wrap up this episode of Clinical Trialblazers. Heather Turner, thank you so much for your perspective, your insights, for sharing your story and your insights and how you look at the role of CEO and how you progressed in your career. Congratulations for all your achievements and best of luck for more achievements and success in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been fun.
Be sure to join us for upcoming episodes of Clinical Trialblazers, where we dive into the people and stories driving innovation across pharma and biotech. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to review and rate this podcast on your favorite platform. It really helps others discover our show. Clinical Trialblazers is produced by Parexel Biotech and hosted by me, Alberto Grignolo, with production support from Acast Creative Studios. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay curious and continue advancing the future of clinical research.